All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Robinson. I'm Vice President of Human Resources here at Viewpoint, and I've been here for almost 4 years. Time flies, for sure. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today for what I believe will be a very informative and relevant discussion. Just recently, Lauren sent out an email asking people for topics that they're interested in hearing more about. And the topic that we heard over and over was mental well-being, that people would like to learn more about it, as well as understand resources that may be available to them. So we decided today to have a panel join us to talk about that topic. And one statistic that I think is very interesting is around the world, the global population, at least 25% of the population suffers from some kind of mental health challenges, which in my opinion means it impacts all of us, either directly or indirectly. Personally, I have a niece who tried to commit suicide last year. She's getting the resources she needs and she's doing well. And I also have a grandfather who was bipolar. So this topic is extremely relevant in my home, as well as I'm sure many of yours. So with that, the Stability Network is a group that Lauren connected with recently to learn more. And the folks who are joining us today have two things, well, actually three things in common. One is they're part of the Stability Network. Number two, they all come from some part of the tech sector. And the third is they've all had some kind of mental health challenge in their past or present. And so they are willing to join us today to talk more about a topic that frankly doesn't get a lot of airplay, and a topic that we feel is extremely relevant and needs to be talked about more. So with that, I'd like to open up for introductions. Maridee, if you'd like to start.
Sure. My name is Maridee ODay, and I've been with the Stability Network for a couple of years now. And I work for the DDC Group, which is a company that does back office business processing work for freight companies. And I have a background with Microsoft Consulting and with Costco Wholesale. And I've been working in the tech industry for many, many years. And I live with bipolar disorder.
Good morning. My name is Topher Jerome. I work for a small company in Seattle called Jasper Health. We're developing a tablet application to help people who are suicidal while they're in the emergency department. It's a small startup, and my background is a long time ago in information technology, clinical information systems, web development, and then due to my own behavioral health, mental health, and addiction issues, I dropped out of the world for a little while, and I came back and I got involved and worked in mental health for the past 12 years. And I'm also a suicide attempt survivor multiple times. And so this project to me is incredibly meaningful because it brings together my background in technology, my mental health background professionally, as well as my lived experience. And my job title is the Director of Lived Experience Integration, because that's a big part of what we're doing. And I live with substance use disorder, complex PTSD, anxiety, depression, whatever else goes along with that.
Good morning. My name is Bob Beamer. I also work at a small company in the Seattle area called Microsoft, and I work in the security and compliance area there within the legal department. I've been with Microsoft for about 12 years. Prior to that, another company, another industry, and prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps as an intelligence officer. I know that's an oxymoron. I live with ADD, ADHD, with anxiety, depression, and with PTSD. And as Lisa indicated, we're all here as members of the Stability Network, which is an organization of folks. We have about 175 stability leaders across the United States. But the idea is for us to do just what we're doing here today. Show up, tell our stories, let folks see that it's real, let folks see that it's nothing to be ashamed of to have a mental health issue. And above all, try to inspire folks to get on whatever track they need to get on so that they can thrive with whatever issues they're dealing with as well. So that's kind of our background and our passion here that brings us together today.
Great, thank you very much. One quick question. I know our audience is fairly small in the room, but how's the sound? Are you guys able to hear everything okay? All right, excellent, thank you. So we're going to go through a set of questions, and these questions we talked about in advance, and after this set of questions, we'll actually go to some employee questions for the panel. The first question I have is actually for all of you, and Bob, maybe we'll go in reverse order this time and start with you. Bob, when did you first become aware that something wasn't feeling quite right? And when did you decide to reach out and seek treatment?
So as I mentioned, I was in the Marine Corps during my early days, and that was a very work hard, play hard kind of culture. And between that culture and a genetic predisposition, I was probably one of the most functional alcoholics you would ever run across. And I drank heavily for many years, right up to the point where 2 U.S. Marshals pulled me off of an airplane because I was too drunk to fly. And checked myself into rehab, thinking that that would make my world better. It didn't. After I stopped drinking, I had anger management issues. I had mood swings. I had inability to focus. My work performance declined. My family performance declined. So I knew there was something else there. And after working with alcohol counselors who referred me to psychologists, I started getting some screenings and getting some diagnoses that actually made sense. And it turns out I'd been self-medicating for a couple of decades. So after then working with the right doctors and PhDs to get some counseling, some therapy, and some meds, spending a few years to get all that in balance, that's what got me to where I am today.
Great, thank you.
You know, you prepare all in advance and then you get the microphone, you go, what was I going to say? When did I first notice? That's really a kind of complex in a lot of ways. When I was raised in a chaotic, alcoholic, drug addicted, on a hippie commune in the Appalachian Mountains. I wasn't sent to school. I mean, it's just chaos and bizarreness and neglect and all this stuff. So I launched myself when I finally am in the world. I'm about 18 years old and working for this small nursing home. And I broke up with my boyfriend at the time, and I was incredibly depressed. And I didn't have words for what that was. I just knew that I wanted to die and I didn't like my life. And a friend of mine suggested going to therapy. He went to therapy. I was like, okay, you know, so I went and I started to learn that I wasn't alone, that there was reasons behind how I felt, which was the opening of a door, and decades of therapy followed. But along the way, I was a young budding alcoholic, later IV drug addict, and as my life became more and more entwined with, you know, addiction and neglected mental health issues, you know, I wound up attempting suicide in the hospital for forever, coma, you know, all this stuff. And when I came out of it, I'd made this promise to my family that I wouldn't kill myself. And I yet wasn't getting that mental health was such a more major part of my life. And so what happened was I continued to struggle, and I was stuck in this place where I wanted to die. I was on the edge of suicide, and I had this promise to my family who I loved. And that sort of forced me into recovery, which is when I finally was able not only to ask for help, but to listen and hear what people were saying to me and follow directions in a new way. So it was a moment of surrender in a lot of ways. Yeah, so that's probably a much longer answer than you were looking for, but that was a long time ago, and life is pretty good, although it's still a lot of work to stay well.
Great. Thank you very much. And it wasn't too long at all. It was perfect. Thank you.
So, excuse me, my symptoms began at a really young age. I remember being in even elementary school and middle school and going to the nurse a lot because I didn't feel well. I had stomach aches, and looking back now, I know it was depression because it was just a heaviness inside that I felt. And as I got older, I started to have more and more mood swings, and they started to interfere with my life. And more and more, when I was working at Costco, I would hide in the stairwell and cry sometimes at work, and I'd spend time off. I'd take time off for depression. But what really led me to seek help was I ended up spending some time in the hospital, and I just really disliked the experience. So I decided I didn't want to repeat that. And so I saw a doctor that I just agreed with myself that I would follow whatever direction they gave me, because I'd seen previous doctors and it just hadn't worked for me. But I decided that this time I was going to follow through. And I started taking the medicine that they prescribed regularly, and my life really changed after that. So that's what led me to change and really seek help. So it really worked for me too. My life absolutely changed after that. So it was wonderful.
All right. Thank you very much. So I think all three of you referenced that as you were realizing there were some issues, some things that you wanted to deal with, there was a work component involved. And so my question, and Maridee, if we could start with you, how did your employer and colleagues respond to your mental health needs? And what did they do that was helpful, and what could have been more helpful?
So when I was at Costco, I ended up taking some time off because of my depression and my illness. And I left Costco in 2000 the first time. And back in 1999 was when I was taking time off due to the Family Medical Leave Act, based on my doctor's prescribed care. And at the time, the HR department, it felt like they didn't believe me, which was not helpful. It felt like I felt kind of shamed. And that was really hard for me. But as time went on, I got more and more confident about what was wrong and how I felt about my own illness. And as that started to happen, I got more confident around myself and my illness. And then people started to respond to me better about it. So it was like, I think as time went on, people are starting to respect mental health and diversity more. But also it's a matter of how I feel about it and how I present it that people respond to it. So that's kind of been my experience around it.
Great. Thank you. And Bob, what are your thoughts?
So just as I've grown and learned more about me and my own mental health and become introspective, I think companies are following in suit. They've got to grow and learn how to manage this with their employee base as well. So Microsoft has a very open culture. They value diversity, and mental health is just one facet of a diverse workforce. So the words were out there, the meetings, the trainings were out there. But I ended up having an episode at work, PTSD related. I was triggered by a conversation with a manager. Things had been building up for a while, and I had reached out to HR 6 months in advance of this, recognizing that something was not right and asking for some help. And because of the newness of this all and because of the inexperience with our HR people, their response was to just direct me to EAP, to Employee Assistance Program, which was fine, except that I'd already been in therapy for years. I was already on meds. I knew I needed something more, and I knew what part of the problems I was having at work were mine to own and what parts weren't mine to own. The organization wasn't mature enough perhaps at the time to help me navigate that properly. So 6 months later, I had an episode, and I took some time off. As I came back then, the organization started to understand that they needed to treat this differently, needed to work with me differently. They did. And I'm happy to say that it's been a good learning experience for all of us. A year and a half later, I'm back in my same role. I have the same level of responsibilities, and we're all moving forward without any issues. So again, a learning experience for everybody, from the individual all the way up to the company.
All right, thanks, Bob. So I think we've all heard the phrase, "If I'd known then what I know now." I think it's a pretty good song too. Anyway, that I think that plays into our lives in many ways. And so my question, and Topher, we'll start with you, is if you had known back when you were struggling and didn't know what to do, if you known then what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
That's a really good question. I have had this lifelong need to convince the world that I was okay. I play this actor on a stage that for people to love and to respond to, and people loved who I projected, and I got lots of positive feedback, right? All the while, I'm behind that projection suffering. I have all these stories in my head that I'm a failure, I'm stupid, you never went to school, you're blah, blah, blah. I mean, the list goes on and on. And then behind that image, behind that projection, I've convinced myself that I am broken and that I'm not worthy, that, you fill in the list, right? So if I were to go back, I would try to help explain how I was functioning in the world, and to let that younger self know that I'm okay, that you're not alone, and that people will actually love and respond to you if you're your authentic self, and that's the love that will help you feel less isolated. So the more I give myself permission to open up, or to tell myself, if you can just open up a little bit to a trusted friend, then you're not going to feel so alone. And it's that loneliness that really can be life-threatening. The other piece is just learning to have some compassion. It's like, oh my God, you have to be this way because you're just trying to cope the only way you know how. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that is so much work. And it's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that you had to work so hard to be okay in this world, and to love that part of self that is just struggling. So I guess that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you.
That's beautiful, Topher.
Yeah, great answer. I love that part about being your authentic self and not being so hard on yourself. I think everyone could use that advice. Maridee, how about you?
Can you ask the question again?
Just thinking back when you were first struggling, if you'd known then what you know now, what would you tell your former self at that time?
So if I knew then what I know now is that I am a director in an organization, and I'm healthy and happy and feel peaceful almost every day. And I don't even think about how I feel most of the time, which is almost impossible before. And so what I would tell myself back then is to have faith and to just keep moving forward step by step. And that is something that was super hard for me at the time. I didn't have any faith. I just didn't trust the process. I just thought this was never going to end, that these feelings inside would never go away. And my illness, bipolar 2, is an illness that does have a cure, or maybe not a cure, but a solution. And it was a solution that worked for me, which was medication. And if I just could tell myself, just have faith, keep trying, and you're going to be okay, then I would know that things would work out. So.
Great, thank you. So this next question has to do with burnout and being in the fourth quarter and the holiday season. I know, everyone's running a little ragged, trying to get everything done both at work and at home. So Bob, what techniques do you use to manage your health in order to prevent burnout?
So there are a lot of different things that people will tell you work for them to help prevent burnout. Part of the problem with being burned out is that you're just giving too much, and you're giving too much to the company, or you're giving too much to the family, or you're just giving too much to everything but you. So I think for me, what works well to prevent burnout is making sure that I carve out a little Bob time every once in a while and tell myself that I don't necessarily need to finish this project or this paper or this report or this email today. It can wait. I'm really good at telling other people, hey, nobody's shooting at us. It's not that big a deal. It's hard to internalize that advice myself. But I think that one of the keys to preventing burnout is, and you hear it every time you get on an airplane, in the event of a sudden cabin depressurization, the oxygen masks drop, put your own on first before you take care of the people next to you. If you're not taking some time for yourself, if you're not addressing your own needs, you're not going to be any good for anybody, and that's just going to fuel the burnout even faster.
All right, Topher, what about you?
Being a level 5 people pleaser, it's hard because I want to perform all the time. I want to look good. I want, it's just like, so that leads to burnout for me pretty quickly. So much of it falls back to what I've learned in 12-step programs, which is one day at a time. Especially around this time of year, because I'm not a huge fan of the holidays. This year is particularly hard because we just had a suicide in my immediate family. And so it's, for me, especially now, right, is like, okay, today, what do I have to do? Well, I got on a plane and I flew to Portland, right? And I come here and I do the talk, right? It's about looking at just trying to maintain some balance, trying to find some time for myself. And I think probably the biggest thing for me are boundaries. What I was talking about before, about being truthful and being honest, and is that the people I work for know that I have to have work-life balance as much as possible. So I don't work evenings. I do work early mornings, but the evenings are times where I can be with my husband, or I can go to be with my community, with my support system. I can do things for fun. I don't work on weekends unless it's absolutely necessary. My employer knows this about me and respects the fact that I have to have some boundaries. And they also know that I'll do a good job. And so for me, it's really important to be able to communicate that with somebody, my supervisor. I work in a small company and everybody knows my story, so it's easy for me, but I think that's really important. And self-care, when I'm stressed out, I'm anxious, what do? I drink lots of coffee, right? I do all these things contrary. I'm tired, so I get up earlier to try to do more work, right? And it's like, so I sort of have this automatic response to do the thing that's contrary to my actual mental health. So I have to remember, it's like, wait a minute, you're anxious. Relax, do some meditation, do some focused breathing. I'm tired. Take a nap in the afternoon if you can, or when you get home from work. Sleep in an extra hour. There's ways to manage that. And then the other one for me, which when I'm stressed out or anxious or depressed, is my eating goes out the window, right? It's like I don't feel like cooking. I eat what's immediately handy. So it's trying to maintain my diet, and also exercise is really important. I walk every morning, probably about 3 miles, And regardless, rain, snow, sleet, whatever, I get up and I go, and that's just part of my routine. And I have to maintain that even when I'm stressed. So.
Great, thank you. Those are all good techniques. You know, it's similar. I was talking with my brother last night, and he walks every day at lunch for 3 miles. And he's older than I am, but he's starting to look younger than I am. So I think I need to start walking more. So this next question is similar, and Topher, you already started talking about this a little bit. So maybe if we could turn it back to you and then to Bob. So we are going into the holiday season, or we're in the midst of the holiday season. And the holidays can be a lot of joy, a lot of fun for people. But for some people, it can also be a time of sadness and extra stress. So any thoughts or, you know, techniques that you can suggest to our employees that might help them?
It's funny, I had the questions mixed up in my head. So I was thinking we were talking about the holiday question. Oh my God, expectations, right? The holidays get all about like, I need to have fun. I'm supposed to be enjoying myself. I'm showing up for family. I'm going to parties. I'm, you know, all that stuff that goes on. And it's really giving myself permission to say no. You know, it's like, I'm an introvert. Parties, I can enjoy them, but they're exhausting. And just give myself permission to say, no, I'm sorry. I'm just not up to it right now. You know, I've had enough of this right now, you know, not even needing to make excuses for people. It's just like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it. Right. So that's another boundary. The other thing is around expectations. This quick story about my mother when she was alive. She used to drive me crazy. I mean, mothers can do that, but so one of the things at holidays, she was an alcoholic, and anyway, she'd be drinking, and then she'd start telling these tall tales, right? And outrageous stories, and I just like all my siblings and I it would just drive us crazy. It's like you just want to correct her. And I had a therapist once who said, "Can you just look at her as though she was a little old lady, a crazy little old lady?" And it's like, oh, I was able to do that. So then now I'm able to do that in holiday situations or any situation where somebody's really irritating me. It's like, oh, this person's just doing the best that they can in this moment, right? I can have compassion for almost anybody. And so if I start approaching the world that way instead of like being totally annoyed or freaked out by family or whatever, it helps a lot. And just taking care of yourself, take a break, time out. Take time off if you need it. Binge watch Netflix if you need to, right? You know, there's nothing wrong with escape in moderation. And just maintaining perspective that this day will end, the next day will end, the holidays will be over, the spring will come again. And yeah.
Good. So the holidays, I don't like them because it's about an external locus of control versus an internal locus of control. You're constantly, to Topher's point, you're invited here, you got to go there, you have to make an appearance here, you have an obligation there. And I would echo very simply what Topher said. It's okay to say no. It goes back to the oxygen mask thing. If you're too busy running around and trying to satisfy everybody else's expectations for your holiday period, then you're not taking care of yourself. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to strike a balance. I think a very important part of being able to do that, though, for me and my wife is the communication piece. We have a very large desk calendar that we keep up on a wall, and we once a week sit down and look at it. And we pencil in, I've got this on Thursday night. Okay, well, we've got this together on Wednesday night. And then you start to see where the conflicts are stacking up, and you say, this is too much. But sometimes you don't see that until it's laid out on paper in front of you. And then you can be smart and be sensible about parsing things out of the schedule that really aren't important to you, but may be more important to somebody else. So I think that's a big piece of it for me. The other thing that I struggle with, and maybe Topher can relate to this as well, is I stopped drinking almost 8 years ago. That was how I got along at parties. That made every party fun. When you're sober in a room full of people who are drinking, it can be difficult sometimes. So for me, when we're looking at that calendar, I'm also looking at, okay, of the things that we're talking about doing, the places we're thinking about going, is that an environment that's going to be good for me too? Even if I want to go, is the environment itself going to be healthy for me? And sometimes if it's not, we'll back out. And I used to feel some shame about that, but I've taught myself over the past few years that it's nothing to be shameful for. It's part of self-care. So I think that's the two pieces about holidays that are key to my coping.
I want to add one thing to what you're saying, which is always give yourself an out. You know, if you go to a party, just, you know, take your own car, show up there, know that you can leave early. Don't feel like you have to close the event. If you get stressed or tired or burn out, you know, and just uncomfortable with it, just leave, right? People will understand. And if they don't, that's their problem.
Great, thank you. That's excellent advice. Thank you. So one of the items we talked about that we all have in common is working for a technology company, and there are many great things about working in the tech sector, but it can also be very fast-paced and at times demanding. So, you know, I'd love to hear from the three of you, and Maridee, starting with you, on advice you have on staying grounded and managing through the stress of your day-to-day work.
Sure. One of the things the guys have mentioned that I totally agree with is having boundaries. I'm really, really good about saying no when people want to bring too much to me. When my managers and different people from different groups are bringing tasks to me and it starts to pile up, and sometimes people don't know what other people have given me. So I just have a lot on my plate. I make sure that I'm really transparent about how much I have to do, and make sure that my manager helps me with my priorities, or helps understand where my priorities are, so that I can make sure that my plate is not too full and that everything has a time and a place that it's due. So that's very, very clear, so that I don't become overwhelmed, because that is the one thing, becoming overwhelmed, that will kick my symptoms back into place. So I'm very, very strict with my boundaries around being overwhelmed. And I make sure that I'm a high producer and I do a good job at work, because that way I have a space for when I don't feel well, then I'm well respected and understood. And that's how I maintain my balance at work, probably, is those two ways. I make sure I get enough rest, and I just take care of myself.
So I work with some in this culture. It's better now, but it's like, okay, so we have this day-long meeting, and then we're 2 hours into it, and the leader says, okay, let's take a break, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs, walk, check in on your email, and let's regroup in 7 minutes. And I'm like, seriously? You know, so there's this pressure, go, you know, and it's like, it's crazy making for me, right? It's like, I can't even catch up with my thoughts about absorbing all the information that's going on, right? You know, so I've been suggesting, well, let's actually take a real break, right? You know, maybe we should have lunch once in a while, right? And, you know, I'm on the leadership team, so I can propose this stuff pretty easily. The other thing I do, which is super important, is I get stressed out. There's certain meetings I know that are going to stress me out, and I know this energy is going to come at me, stuff at me. And so part of my boundary is visualizing that I'm within the circle, and all that energy is bouncing off this circle. And then I can reach out and pull in my stuff, and then focus on my stuff, and just let that stuff be out there. And a big part of that for me is planning my day. I look at my calendar in the morning. I have a meditation time. Then I look at my calendar. I see what's coming up. I look for the things in my schedule that I know are going to stress me. And there are almost always things that are going to stress me. And so then I prepare myself before I go into that, just calm myself, remember that I can have boundaries, remember that I have a voice, and that helps immensely. And it's Yeah, so those are some things. And then the boundary thing, saying, no, I can't do that. And sometimes, we're a small startup, so we all have to do everything. And that can be hard, but, I have limits and I express those and people respect them.
I'm going to echo the boundaries piece first and foremost. Again, it's okay to say no, right? None of us are superhuman. We have this goofy saying at work that, when you do good work, you get rewarded by getting more work to do. It's great to be the go-to guy from an ego stroke perspective, but that's the quickest way to lose the balance, is trying to be the go-to guy for everybody. And we've all talked about that to some extent here. So yes, being able to say no. So how do I manage being able to say no? At my desk, I've got 2 whiteboards that are up on the wall opposite me. One of them is where I kind of do my daily, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and need to draw something out, I'm a visual guy. That's my working whiteboard. The other whiteboard is all of my priorities and projects. And so whenever something new comes my way, whether it's an email or a phone call or a drive-by, as I'm listening to what it is I'm about to be asked to do, I'm looking at that one whiteboard and I'm asking, does this fit in? Does this support my objectives, my priorities, my projects? And if it doesn't, that makes it a hell of a lot easier to say no. And if you're being directed to do something like that, that's where you tell your boss, look, this is what I've got going on. You tell me where this is going to fit and what I have to get rid of. And then that helps them readjust the priorities too, when they recognize all the other things they've already asked you to do that are in process. So that piece is important from a strategic overall balance perspective. Some of the little things that I do though, if I schedule a meeting, I don't take the full hour that Outlook would give you. I book it for 45 minutes. That gives you travel time. That gives you the ability to go to the bathroom. That gives you the ability to get something to eat, a cup of coffee, and you're not constantly running from one thing to the next. One of the things that stresses me out being a people pleaser is being late to a meeting. Well, if I schedule time for transit, then I'm generally not late. So now I could walk into a meeting concentrating on what's going on, not concentrating on the fact that I embarrassed myself by walking in late. Sometimes it's the small things that help you get through a given day. But if you're back to back in meetings and you have 6 or 7 meetings a day and you're late to 4 or 5 of them, that's a lot of stress you throw on yourself. It's easy to eliminate. And when you start to set those expectations with people, they respect them. I had for a while an out of office message that was on all the time. And what it said was, I check email twice a day. I check in the morning and I check in the afternoon. And if you've got something that's more urgent than that, you're going to have to call me. But that keeps me from then having to constantly monitor my email, get distracted, get stressed out because something else just popped up and now I got to put this aside and deal with this other thing. It allows me to concentrate on that big whiteboard and make sure that I'm managing my time in a way that helps me make maximum usage of my time at work, so that then when I go home at the end of the day, I look at that whiteboard one more time and I say, did I move any of these balls down the field? And on the way out of the office, I can say, yeah, I worked on that one. I did that one. I got this one closer. Now I can walk out the door and feel like I accomplished something and then leave it all at work when I go home. I don't have to think about it anymore because I know I'm doing a good job. I don't worry that I'm failing. So that whiteboard, I think for me, is probably one of the most critical pieces of equipment in my office.
Great, thank you very much. So as I mentioned earlier, the first set of questions were we agreed on with the Stability Network. And so for this second portion, we actually sent out an email to all employees soliciting questions for the panel. And we had a very large response, a big number of questions that were submitted, which is exciting. So thank you for that. We will not get to all the questions today. So what we did is chose the questions that are really most relevant to the discussion we're having here. If your question that you submitted is not asked today, please reach out to either your manager or your HR business partner to talk with them about what's on your mind. So from there, I will kick it off with the first question from Viewpoint employees. And the question is, if we have a coworker that we believe suffers from mental health issues and it impacts our interactions in our work, what are the best techniques for supporting them? And I'm going to open this up to whoever feels compelled to answer.
Having been somebody who was needing support, especially back when I was at Costco, the best way someone could support me would be to just be understanding, just be non-judgmental, just listen. Things you don't want to do or that I didn't want done to me would be any kind of pressure to any kind of real advice or pressure to act a certain way. Mostly just non-judgmental understanding. Questions are fine. But mostly just knowing that someone cares is really nice. But yeah, knowing that someone wants to know from their heart is really valuable. Sensing that someone wants to know or has an ulterior motive is not a good thing. So that's what's really helpful to me when I was in that situation.
This is a hard one, in that if somebody doesn't want to open up and you're dealing with the pressure of something that you feel might be a mental health challenge, it's really hard to like address it without feeling accused, trying to come across as accusatory. One of the things that has helped me, when I've been supervising people and when just with coworkers is, obviously I'm open about my experience, right? But if I can lead by example by saying, this has really been, I've been having a really hard day. This, just disclosing a little bit, especially if you can find something around what you think might be happening for this person. So you're not asking directly, but you open up a little bit about what's going on for you. And hopefully that can start a conversation. And if the person starts talking to you about what's going on for them, then you can talk about what resources, EAP, reaching out, trying to find a therapist or something like that. But you've got to be careful about saying, you seem really like you're manic. That may not be helpful, right? But if you develop a little bit of trust, you can say things like, I noticed that you seem pretty wound up right now. Is there something going on for you? Is there anything I can do to help? Right? I don't know if it's not super concrete. So much of all this stuff for me is about relationship. And if you can develop some sort of relationship that will allow for some trust, then you can hopefully help the person. And then you feel listened to and supported.
Great, thank you. And one item I'll mention as well is if you are feeling like this may be impacting interactions at work and or your the actual work product, I strongly recommend that you also consider talking with your manager or potentially someone in HR, your HR business partner, or potentially Lauren, who's our benefits manager. There are additional resources who can help. Did you have anything else to add?
I was just going to say, and Maridee and Topher both kind of spoke to it. You want to be non-judgmental. Don't be diagnostic. None of us in this room are psychologists or psychiatrists, right? And what may be, to Topher's point, you look really manic. They could have just had 18 cups of coffee, and they're not really manic. They're just wired, that type of a thing. But if you speak to the facts, hey, I notice you've been a little distant lately, or I notice you've been a little distracted lately. Is there anything I can help you with? Or if you want to talk, I'm here for you. The key is to hug, but not hug too tight. You don't want to smother them, but you want to let folks know that you're genuinely interested in trying to help them. And to Topher's point, also share a little bit about your own experience. Yeah, I hate this time of year. I'm struggling with this stuff too. Meeting year-end deadlines and all this stuff at home. Let's get a cup of coffee sometime and chat about it. And there's that genuineness that needs to come forward for somebody to open up, but you got to let them do it in their time and in their way. As people, we have a natural desire to try to help fix other people. This isn't the kind of stuff where you fix it for somebody. It's something that somebody has to kind of fix for themselves.
Great, thank you very much. So this next question from one of our employees is relates to feelings of physical anxiety. So how do you suggest handling physical anxiety feelings in a business environment such as stomach pain, nervousness, anxiety?
Me, anxious? Oh my God. I really focus on mindfulness. For me, that means noticing I'm anxious. Half the time I don't notice I'm anxious till I'm 90 miles down the road, right? So when I start to feel my stomach, which is a good place where I feel anxiety a lot, it's like, oh, what's going on? And then I try to think back to when that started in that moment, and then try to reframe whatever the trigger was, right? So, me, I'm hypervigilant, really focused on how people are responding to me. I say good morning to my boss and she walks down the hall and she doesn't acknowledge me. Then all of a sudden I'm thinking I did something wrong. She doesn't like me, whatever, and I make up stories. Then I'm carrying that stress with me through the day. And I think back, it's like, oh, when did that start? Oh, that was that interaction. Oh, what is it? She's just busy, right? It's like, and so that's just one simple example of how you can do it. The other thing is breathing exercises. My watch fortunately tells me to breathe periodically, which is nice because I get into really shallow breaths, right? I'm not getting enough air. And it's like, oh, gosh, and just do that a few times. It can really bring you down. I think in all of this, the key though is noticing, because it's hard to notice you're in that state until you're in it. And then, but once you notice, there's all kinds of things you can do to bring yourself down.
All right, so next question from our employees. What tips do you have to remain calm in frustrating situations, especially a situation where you might be a role model for others?
I think one of the things that helps, and Topher's talked about the mindfulness aspect. I have been working for several years now to train myself to move from reacting to responding, right? Reacting is that animal brain where you're fight or flight and you're instantly launched because somebody said something you didn't agree with, or somebody asked you to do something that you didn't want to do. It's amazing when you think about it. The idea of taking a deep breath seems like a really long time to you, and it seems like it's going to be one of these things where everybody in the room is going to notice that you're taking a deep breath. They're not. The time it takes you to take a deep breath is all the time you need to switch from reacting to responding. And it gives you a moment to do, as Topher said, understand the frustration. I'm frustrated because they're asking me to do something else and I'm already overloaded. Okay, I get it. So now this is a time for me to perhaps say no, right? Am I frustrated because I don't agree with what they're saying? Well, not all conflict is bad. I can actually voice that disagreement without creating a fight. I'm not walking into an ambush here. I mean, but it's that 1 second that it takes you to take a deep breath can be critical in making the difference between reacting and responding. And then just remember that the day is going to be full of those frustrating moments, right? And the more, if you look at it as a challenge and you think about how many of them you've dealt with and slapped down during the course of the day, and you reflect on that when you're looking at your whiteboard on the way out of your office, it gives you that much more strength, that much more confidence, and that much more practice in carrying that forward from day to day to day. So look at the frustration as a challenge that can be almost fun to deal with, especially when you can watch your progress in dealing with those frustrations. I love to say, 2 months ago, I would have done this, but today I'm doing that. And when I say that to somebody, I'm actually saying it to myself more than I'm saying it to them.
And if that doesn't work, just imagine they're a little woodland creature talking.
We might have to end on that. So here's another question, we heard this from a few people. What suggestions do you have for finding resources such as counselors or doctors if you're looking for help? So I think this question is twofold. One is, how do you find a counselor, somebody that you feel you can actually talk with, somebody you're comfortable with? And then the second piece of the question is, how do you look for low cost options? For example, if somebody's on an insurance plan that doesn't cover much of the visits, what kind of low cost options are there?
So most companies, and I did ask, you guys have an EAP, you have an employee assistance program, and that is probably one of the best sources when you first recognize that you've got something you need to contend with, you're not sure what it is, you're not sure who to talk to. Try your EAP, because they're used to that. That's a good entry point into self-care, all right? And when you start talking to your EAP providers about the issues, they can help provide those referrals to you. And they understand your work environment, your culture, they understand your health benefits. And so they can help you map a path and make some referrals and make some recommendations. One thing I will tell you though is, it's always nice to get referrals from people, but we all respond to therapists differently. We all respond to doctors differently, and what works for one person may not work for another. Don't expect to do one-stop shopping and land on the right therapist the first time. I'm on my 4th, I think, that I've been working with since I stopped drinking. And it took me quite a few years to land with this guy who, lo and behold, happens to specialize in veterans with PTSD and substance abuse and all the things that are on my list of challenges. And so it took a while. And it's a function then of being patient and recognizing that you're in this for the long haul. Don't expect to get an immediate fix. It's not going to happen. There's no magic pill, despite the fact that we all may take medications. Medications take care of something like 45% of your issue, and the rest is going to be you and your behavior and your framing and your mindset. It takes a while to get there. Be patient. I have a sign on my office door that I see when I walk in every day, and it says, "Fate whispers to the warrior, you cannot withstand the storm. The warrior whispers back, I am the storm." So just remember, you're stronger than you think you are. And if you can be patient, you'll persevere as you navigate through your own treatment.
Can I add something really quickly? I love what you said. I think that's great. One thing I do want to add is that I found that I went through a lot of counselors and a lot of doctors before I started taking medication. And I learned a lot from counseling and I loved it. I wasn't able to apply a lot of it until I had the right medication because I was not able to change my behaviors effectively. And also I saw a lot of doctors, and I found later, thinking back, that once I saw more than 3 doctors, I should have realized it wasn't the doctors that I didn't like. It was me not wanting to accept that I needed a doctor. So it wasn't so much the doctors as it was me. So for me, after I went through more than like 3 or 4, it was more my problem than it was theirs, that I didn't want to look at my own issues. So maybe consider after you go through a lot of them, that maybe it might be not just them that's the problem. So sometimes going through a ton of counselors is not necessarily a thing, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
All right, and so this last question has to do with our young people. So the question is, I've read that rates of anxiety and depression are drastically increasing with our global youth over the last 5 years. Do you think that's true, and what can we do to help them?
I think it's true. I know for a fact that it's true. My nephew is suicidal at this time. The biggest thing that I've found to do is relate to him and to tell him what I would have told myself at that age, and to not try to tell him what to do, but to just offer my understanding and compassion.
I don't have any stats or facts to support the allegation or the statement, the hypothesis, but I believe it to be true. I think that part of it is the environment that young people are in nowadays creates a lot more stress. We've all heard about the social media stressors. We've all heard about the academic stressors. I think part of it too is that mental health in general is just far more understood these days, and the ability to diagnose issues at an earlier age is just more prevalent. So I think that's why we see more of it. My son's in therapy. My son is medicated for ADHD. So there's nothing like being able to commiserate, to relate, to sometimes even joke about it with him. But it wasn't until I was able to talk to him about my own experiences that he felt comfortable opening up to me, to where then we could get him into a treatment regimen that he would buy off on, as opposed to just forcing your kid to go to a doctor. So I think that the compassion piece, the relation piece is important. And a lot of what I tell my son is, I want you to have the benefit of dealing with this at 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, so that you're not 45, 46, 47 when you're first starting to address the issues. You always want your kids to have something better than you had, helping them understand that it's okay to have anxiety, it's okay to have depression, it's okay to have ADD, it's okay to treat those things at a younger age, I think ultimately will set them up for a much less painful adulthood. So.
I don't have any, statistically youth suicide's on the rise. Anyway, so I believe the statistics that are coming out. One last thing to throw out there is there's a lot of online resources. Young people are used to, there's free online mental health chats for youth. There's youth suicide chats that are available. I don't know the names of the resources, but if you Google it, or whatever your browser of choice is, or search engine, there are a lot of resources, and that can be a way to help youth understand and just to try to help reduce the stigma. That's why we're doing this, in part, is to help reduce the stigma that you can live with mental health challenges successfully, and that if you are open about it, that can help reduce stigma. Just letting them know it's okay, it's common, and there's help out there.
Great, thank you very much. So that concludes the questions, and I would like to sincerely thank the three of you for joining us today. This is a very important topic, and our intent was to help educate our employees, provide some helpful techniques, and also just to take the stigma away from talking about this topic. And this, taking care of your mental well-being, is in my mind no different than getting your blood pressure checked and taking care of your eyes. It's all, it's all part of your overall well-being. So thank you very much. And for our employees, as you all know, this is the first time we've had a discussion like this here at Viewpoint. So we would love to hear your feedback. Within the next day or two, we'll be sending out an email requesting your input on this session today, as well as looking to you for suggestions on topics that you might be interested in hearing more about in the future. So with that, for those of you who are in Portland, I understand we have breakfast waiting in the next room, so I will let you go enjoy your breakfast. And for all of you who are tuning in, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thank you.